are the top Chinese development companies in China, and who would you compare to like EA Games and Ubisoft?
Well, the top game companies in China have to be classified as the online game operators, some of whom develop their own games, such as NetEase, which is publicly traded on NASDAQ, and some of whom license most of their games, such as the Nine, which is also publicly traded on NASDAQ. They would be considered top game companies because they offer the most popular games to the Chinese gaming population. NetEase develops their own games, so they can be considered a top developer. There are also many small development studios that feed games to the online game operators. It's difficult to identify any Chinese development studio that is developing anything but online games and also categorized as a top development studio, because most Chinese studios are only developing for online because that's where the revenue is generated due to the high rates of piracy. And when I say high rates of piracy, I mean upwards of 90 to 95% for packaged games. And so most of the Chinese companies won't develop for that platform, and they can't develop for console because console games are currently prohibited in China due to a regulation. So the Chinese development companies that stand out are those that develop for online games, and within the online game area, online game operators are the most powerful at this point in time in 2007. And among the online game operators, NetEase is a good example of one that develops their own games, and the Nine is a good example of one that licenses excellent games but then offers them up and operates them in China. There are also many other online game operators that are noteworthy, but those are two examples for you.
So Lisa, can you tell us a little about the evolution of the virtual economy in China, and what's this about this micropayments thing?
Sure. The virtual economy has a very large presence within Chinese games, within the online game world in China. And the micropayments, we call them sort of virtual transactions, and they are available in what's known as free-to-play games. And free-to-play games mean that the gamer is not paying for the client software nor to access the game. They're simply paying for any kind of virtual transaction or dressing up their avatar or any kind of special account services within the game. And those games that are considered free to play actually generate more revenue per gamer than the games that are considered pay to play. And right now, the trend has been over the past couple of years, I suppose since the beginning of 2006, to go towards free-to-play games, because the virtual economy has caught on so well with Chinese gamers. And one reason Niko Partners believes that it has caught on so well is that the Chinese gamer, the Chinese software buyer in general, doesn't really believe in paying for software unless they're getting full access to it. So online games have been popular because you really are just paying for the service to access the game. You're not really paying for the software client. And now with the evolution into free-to-play games with micropayments, you're not even paying to access the game. You're just paying for what you use within the game. So the philosophy or the mindset of the gamer is that they're really not paying for anything unless they want to pay for it. And to that regard, they wind up spending more money than they would if they weren't paying if they were paying directly for the game itself.
It's very interesting. Say, I'm always hearing about the regulation, the Chinese government and the regulatory issues. Can you address that for us, please?
China's government plays an enormous role in every market, and video games is no exception. The regulatory landscape is probably the largest barrier to entry for any company from the West or even from within China. There are countless ministries, probably 15 at least, that touch regulations within the game industry, and there are probably 3 big players within the regulatory landscape. There are people within the Ministry of Agriculture, the General Administration of Press and Publications, the Ministry of Information Industry, just to name a few, that regulate everything from the content of games to giving permits to release games to what is allowed to be shown to youth players. They have regulations for an anti-fatigue system to make sure that young gamers don't spend too much time online. There are regulations for internet cafes, which have 50% of the gameplay, so health and safety regulations. There are regulations for what kind of company can operate a game online in China, and even within and among the Chinese online game operators, there are regulations as to who's allowed to do what with permission and without permission. There are regulations everywhere.
With respect to the regulatory market, we're hearing about how the Chinese are trying to regulate addiction to gaming in China. Can you talk to us about that, please, Lisa?
Okay, the anti-addiction software is really what's known as the fatigue system, anti-fatigue system, I should say, which the government has tried to implement for a couple of years now. May be in place as of July, but may not be fully in place as of July of 2007. And its purpose is to restrict the amount of time that gamers can spend playing a game all in a row. And the amount of hours that the government has designated as too many would be at first a 3-hour block and then a 5-hour block of time. And if you violate playing the game for longer than the government has prescribed under the anti-fatigue regulation, then your character within the game automatically gets demoted from the level that you have attained down to level 1 in some games, or whatever the appropriate equivalent would be in other games. Now, it caused a great uproar among the online game community when the government announced this regulation. It must have been back then in 2005 or beginning of 2006 now. And so what's happened is it went from being a regulation for all gamers to just affecting gamers under the age of 18. Because like with everything else that the government does for regulation within the game industry, the underlying premise is to promote healthy gaming and to prevent the youth from being subjected to bad content and bad health sort of influences. So the point of anti-fatigue is to make sure that the youth get away from their computers and stop being addicted to the games and play for so many hours in a row. Some gamers have just not been getting up from their computer terminals at all to go to the bathroom or to eat food or whatever, and it's been a little bit dangerous for them. And so this policy is supposed to help these gamers forcibly remove themselves from the